president is motivated by his desire to tap into this country's natural resources and critical minerals.
These minerals, Mr. Trump would like to get them.
Are you also considering military force to annex and acquire?
No. Economic force.
Breaking news is shaking Washington as one of America's most important lifelines has been cut. The White House had counted on rare earth metals to power the future. From Detroit's assembly lines to Silicon Valley's microchips. Instead, Canada delivered a stunning blow, shutting down shipments that fuel the backbone of American technology and defense. Donald Trump had promised that tariffs and tough trade policies would shield the nation from outside dependence, presenting it as a fight for American strength and security. But behind closed doors, Ottawa charted its own course. What began as an effort to protect American jobs has now run headfirst into resistance from a trusted ally. Could this standoff shake the foundation of industries that keep the economy running? Will it strain the partnership further? And how far might the fallout reach if neither side steps back? Let's dig in. The breaking point came when Ottawa finally acted. Canada moved swiftly, cutting off the export of critical minerals that had long been the lifeblood of American industry. This was not a small gesture or symbolic move. It meant rare earth elements used in fighter jets, satellites, and smartphones. It meant copper, the backbone of America's power grid, from the plains of Texas to the factories of Ohio. It even meant high-grade coal that fed steel mills in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Washington, once certain of a steady flow across the northern border, was abruptly cut off. The shock spread instantly across America's industrial map. In Detroit, auto companies were informed that shipments of essential metals for electric vehicle batteries were halted. In Phoenix and Albuquerque, defense contractors received warnings that alloys vital to weapons programs were no longer secure. Across the Midwest, copper orders linked to new energy projects froze without warning. For years, Donald Trump had claimed Washington could lean on its neighbors, using tariffs and pressure as leverage. Canada turned that strategy on its head, holding in its hands the very resources that powered America's technology, energy, and defense. The tremors of this decision are still spreading. Detroit's auto industry has been among the hardest hit. Executives rushed into crisis meetings as news spread that rare earth supplies had been suspended. For an industry already battered by inflation and a fragile supply chain, the timing could not have been worse. Batteries, semiconductors, catalytic converters all rely on the metals now stuck on the Canadian side of the border. Factories that were running at high speed to meet electric vehicle demand now face the possibility of shutdowns. For thousands of union workers in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, the specter of layoffs is no longer a distant threat. It is pressing at the door. In Pittsburgh and throughout Pennsylvania's steel towns, the consequences feel just as severe. Canadian coal shipments essential for high-grade steel are gone. Mills that kept their furnaces hot with steady imports are staring at rationing. And for every ton of steel delayed, bridges, skyscrapers, and infrastructure projects stall. These projects employ thousands of Americans, and every delay translates into lost wages and rising frustration. One analyst summed it up without hesitation. Without Canadian materials, America's industrial engine slows, and in many sectors, it comes to a halt. The impact stretches far beyond heavy industry. In Silicon Valley, executives are facing the reality of rare earth shortages that strike at the very core of advanced technology. These elements are not optional. They are the irreplaceable components inside lasers, sensors, and microchips. Without them, the devices that define modern life, from smartphones to medical equipment, cannot be produced at the same scale. Quiet admissions inside California boardrooms reveal the fear that production lines will fall silent, research will be delayed, and the pace of innovation will be interrupted. For a sector that thrives on speed and constant reinvention, that is a devastating prospect. Meanwhile, in Texas and New Mexico, the defense industry braces for impact. Copper is not a luxury for these facilities. It is a necessity. Wiring, guidance systems, advanced munitions, all require it. Officials warned that every delivery delay ripples through national security. The Pentagon has cautioned for years about the risks of relying too heavily on foreign rare earths. Those warnings have now come true. Fighter jet schedules, satellite upgrades, missile programs, all could be pushed back. For a military long accustomed to having everything it needed, Canada's move marks a stark new reality. The ripple effect reaches into corners of the economy that many Americans may not expect. Farmers in Iowa are told the steel needed for equipment repairs may not arrive on time. In Chicago, logistics firms cancel shipments tied to Canadian mines, leaving trucks parked and drivers waiting. On Wall Street, analysts warned that the true depth of the crisis is still underestimated. As shortages pile up, ordinary families will feel it in everyday life. Cars, electronics, home appliances, everything grows more expensive. The pressure spreads from factory floors to kitchen tables. The mood in America's industrial towns is shifting from confusion to anger. For years, Trump told workers that tariffs would bring strength and independence, that allies would bend under Washington's pressure. The reality is proving far different. Canada has made clear that control over minerals means control over the future of American industry. What once felt unshakable is suddenly fragile. In West Virginia and Kentucky, the blow carries a heavy emotional weight. Coal miners, many of whom believed demand at home would safeguard their jobs, now realize that much of the coal used in U.S. steel making was sourced from Canada. Without it, bottlenecks form and ripple outward into every product that relies on steel, from cars to home goods. Union leaders warned that this crisis is not confined to mines. It threatens every American family that depends on affordable steel and steady paychecks. Energy workers in Texas are struck by a bitter irony. America may have oil, but without Canadian copper and rare earths, renewable energy projects struggle. Solar panels, wind turbines, and the vast infrastructure for cleaner power rely on the very minerals now sealed off. Projects stall, investments falter, and jobs in construction and energy services suddenly face uncertainty. In California, the impact feels personal. Semiconductor companies warn of looming shortages in rare earth elements like neodymium and praseodymium, critical for high-performance electronics. Every phone, every laptop, every piece of medical imaging technology depends on them. Analysts warn that without supply, Silicon Valley's innovation engine sputters. Venture capital firms lower their expectations while chip foundries prepare to scale back. Even Wall Street, often buffered from the first waves of supply chain issues, cannot escape. Tech stocks slide, auto shares tumble, and construction companies cut forecasts. Analysts at JP Morgan calculate that a prolonged cutoff could shave 0.5 percentage point off US growth in 2026. That kind of economic hit is usually tied to war or global crisis. This time it comes from the closing of a border for minerals. For millions of Americans with retirement accounts, the pain is already visible in shrinking balances. Consumers will be next. From dealerships in Detroit to store shelves in Kansas City, shortages will push up costs. Families stretched thin by inflation will see cars, electronics, and even housing climb in price. Economists warned that the steel shortage alone could drive home construction costs higher, making housing less affordable. Electric vehicles central to America's climate strategy could drift further out of reach for ordinary households. America has weathered supply shocks before. In the 1970s, oil disrupted daily life. In the 1940s, rubber and steel were rationed for war. But industry experts warn this moment carries its own historic weight. Rare earths and copper are today's invisible lifelines, unseen by most, but crucial to all. Without them, the entire system strains. Political pressure is building quickly. Senators from mining states call for hearings. Governors plead for relief. Local news broadcasts are filled with anxious voices of workers and business owners. A steel worker in Indiana summed it up with blunt honesty. "We were told tariffs would protect us. Now we're paying the price." The irony is cutting deep. Trump promised independence, but what emerges is a picture of dependence more stark than ever. If the lifeline of rare earths and copper can be severed in a single decision, what else might Canada or any other partner be willing to take away? The decision by Canada to cut off shipments of rare earths, copper and coal has landed like a thunderclap across North America. More than an economic measure, it is a signal of shifting power. These are the hidden lifelines of modern life. The raw materials that keep fighter jets in the sky, keep smartphones in every pocket, and keep the energy grid alive from coast to coast. For generations, Washington assumed those resources would flow freely from its neighbor to the north. Ottawa has now reminded the world that access was never guaranteed. And by closing the border, it has exposed the depth of America's dependence. The reverberations were immediate. In Europe, trade envoys scrambled to reach Canadian officials. Germany, already in the middle of its energy transition, moved swiftly to secure copper. France pressed the European Union to build collective procurement programs so member states would not be left behind. In Asia, South Korea, and Japan began negotiating their own contracts, fearful that American demand could crowd them out. Even before Washington had a chance to respond, capitals across the world were moving to secure a lifeline for themselves. And then came Beijing. China, long the dominant player in rare earth production, sees opportunity in this sudden disruption. Analysts warn that if Beijing and Ottawa align, even informally, the United States could be locked into a generation of higher prices and restricted access. Commentators are already calling this the OPEC moment for minerals. Just as oil shocks reshaped geopolitics in the 20th century, the struggle for rare earths and copper is now redrawing the map of 21st century power. Markets reacted within hours. Prices for rare earth elements spiked on global exchanges. Copper futures surged. Steel-grade coal reached highs not seen in over a decade. And across the United States, automakers and chip manufacturers warned of production slowdowns. Tariffs, subsidies, and trade threats cannot conjure raw material where none arrives. A factory floor in Michigan cannot assemble cars without batteries, and no semiconductor lab in California can produce processors without neodymium. America's industrial machine depends on supply lines now blocked, and the consequences are spreading. Rivals have seized on the symbolism. In Beijing, officials point to America's vulnerability as proof that even the strongest nations are exposed when lifelines are interrupted. Russian commentators describe Washington as a giant with fragile foundations. In capitals across the developing world, governments now see leverage in playing suppliers against one another, squeezing better terms while the United States struggles. Perhaps most striking is the shock at home. Americans long assumed Canada would never weaponize resources. That assumption is shattered. If it can happen at the northern border, it can happen anywhere. For Washington's policymakers, the lesson is clear. In this new era, minerals are as decisive as oil once was. Canada, often viewed as a quiet partner, has revealed itself as a resource power in its own right, and America now finds itself in a defensive position. The shift is reshaping alliances. NATO members who once took Washington's industrial dominance as a given now question whether the United States can guarantee the flow of materials needed for collective defense. Fighter jets, missile platforms, radar systems, all rely on the same minerals now being withheld. Without reliable supply, NATO's very foundation wobbles. Some European governments reluctant to rely on American assurances are now dealing directly with Ottawa, bypassing Washington entirely. The ripple effect in Asia is even sharper. Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, fearful of shortages, are racing to lock in long-term contracts with Canadian producers. They want guarantees now, not promises later. The optics for Washington are grim. Instead of rallying allies, the United States watches as its closest partners secure lifelines for themselves while American industries falter. Hovering over all of this is the role of China. For years, Beijing has controlled the rare earth market and wielded that dominance as a strategic tool. With Canada stepping into the role of major supplier, the world is now effectively split between two dominant sources. Analysts warn that even the possibility of coordination between Ottawa and Beijing, whether on pricing, timing, or exports, is enough to keep markets jittery and American companies